"You're in the wrong place, lady." The young soldiers snickered, seeing only a small woman in a worn jacket. They thought she was a tourist. They were about to learn she was a ghost from their darkest legends. The air inside the Western Tactical Training Center was thick with the smells of cordite, cleaning solvent, and sweat, a sharp, metallic perfume that clung to the concrete walls. It was a cathedral of controlled violence, echoing with a constant, chaotic symphony. The deep boom of .308s from the long-distance lanes, the sharp crack of police issue 9 MMS, and the relentless, hammering rhythm of military M4s all blended into a single, deafening roar. Through this maelstrom walked Maren Weiss. At 35, she was a study in unassuming subtlety. Her long, dark hair was tied back in a simple, low ponytail, and her frame was small, almost lost inside a practical, slightly worn gray Arc'teryx jacket that spoke of function, not fashion. On her back, she carried a Goruk GR1, a backpack whose rugged durability was a quiet nod to a life of hardship, a secret handshake for those who knew what to look for. The group of young army privates waiting in line didn't know what to look for. They only saw a civilian woman who looked utterly out of place. "Seriously, is she lost?" whispered Private Leo, a cocky 21-year-old with a fresh buzz cut. He nudged his buddy, Private Sam. "Maybe she thinks this is the DMV." Sam snickered, puffing out his chest. "Look at that antique backpack. Probably thinks she's here to hike." Maren said nothing. She stood at the back of the line, her posture relaxed, her gaze calm as she observed her surroundings. The layout of the firing lanes, the positions of the range officers, the models of the firearms on the racks, her mind catalogued it all with the unconscious ease of breathing. At the intake desk, a bored-looking corporal named Jenkins barely glanced up from his phone. "Name?" he mumbled, scrolling through a social media feed. "Maren Weiss," she said, her voice quiet but clear. Jenkins finally looked at her, his eyes scanning her small frame with open skepticism. "Recreational shooting? Ever handled a firearm before, ma'am?" "A little," Maren replied with a faint, almost sad smile. Behind her, Leo and Sam burst into laughter. "A little?" Leo mocked in a stage whisper. "I bet my next paycheck she can't even handle the recoil from a .22. The range supervisor, a grizzled man named Carson with 3 decades of service etched into the lines on his face, came over and picked up her registration form. "Says here you want to try the 800-meter lane. That's advanced, ma'am. Seriously advanced." He pointed a thick thumb toward a rack of smaller rifles. "Why don't you start with one of those Ruger 10-22s? They're more, your speed. Won't dislocate a shoulder." "I'll be fine," Maren said, the certainty in her soft voice cutting through the noise. Carson shrugged, a look of weary resignation on his face. "Your money. Just don't come crying to me when you can't hit the target shed." He turned to Leo and Sam. "Keep an eye on her. Make sure she points it downrange." The soldiers grinned, their mockery now emboldened by official sanction. Maren simply moved past them, her worn leather gloves held loosely in one hand, silent as the morning fog. When her turn finally came, Maren ignored the racks of waiting rifles. She bypassed the standard checkout and walked directly toward the heart of the facility, the master control console for the entire range. It was a sleek, imposing piece of technology, a suspended holographic interface that glowed with a cool blue light, managing everything from target logistics to environmental simulations. Carson yelled from across the floor, "Hey! Ma'am! That's for authorized personnel only." Maren didn't seem to hear him. She reached the console and, without a flicker of hesitation, placed her right hand flat onto the recessed biometric gel pad at its center. For a single, drawn-out second, nothing happened. An eerie blue light flowed out of the gel and spread upward along the texture of the console's circuitry. The cool blue user interface flickered, spasmed, and then died, plunging the console into darkness. From the machine's core, a low, resonant thrum began to vibrate through the floor, a deep hum that made the teeth of everyone in the room ache. The screen flashed back to life, but it was no longer blue. It was a stark, menacing crimson, the color of a freshly opened wound. This was a classified access mode that most of the staff had only ever read about in manuals. In the back office, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, a man who carried the weight of 3 combat tours in his eyes, flinched as his personal datapad emitted a high-pitched, insistent tone he hadn't heard in a decade. A Priority 1 alert. He burst out of his office, his face ashen. What's going on? Who accessed the system? On the main screen, bold, block letters began to appear, one after another, as if being typed by an invisible hand. Biosignature match detected. Cross-referencing black files. Ghost protocol initiated. The soldiers, Leo and Sam, had gone completely silent, their mocking smirks replaced by gaping mouths. Then came the final confirmation, displayed for the entire room to see. Call sign, Widow. Mark, reactivated. A young officer standing near the console stumbled back, his face drained of all color. Widow, as in, from Operation Nightfall, he stammered. I thought that was just a scare story they told recruits. A myth. Hayes stared at Marin, his professional composure shattering. Operation Nightfall, he breathed, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and awe. The official report said there were no survivors. None. He took a step closer, his eyes locked on the small, quiet woman who now stood bathed in the console's blood-red glow. You, he whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. You're the one. You're the ghost. The atmosphere in the range had transformed. The cacophony of gunfire dwindled to an eerie silence as shooters lowered their weapons, drawn by the palpable shift in gravity. All eyes were on Marin and the crimson screen that had just resurrected a legend. Get me access to that terminal, now. Hayes barked. A man stepped forward, his movements precise and economical. Gunnery Sergeant Elias Vance was a relic from a different era of warfare, a grizzled veteran with a face like a roadmap of old battles. One of his eyes, a cybernetic replacement, glowed with a faint, ruby light. He pulled a heavy-duty data cable from his own pack and jacked it directly into a maintenance port on the console's chassis. Patching in, sir, Vance said, his voice a low gravel. His cybernetic eye whirred softly as data streamed across its lens. The system has locked out standard admin protocols. It's running on a black file directory. I'm attempting a bypass. On his wrist-mounted tablet, encrypted files began to decrypt, revealing redacted mission logs and fragmented reports that were never meant to see the light of day. Unit designation, Task Force Chimera. Commanding asset, Widow. Mission history, 14 engagements. Friendly casualty rate, 0%. Carson, the range supervisor, stared at the numbers, his jaw slack. 0%. Over 14 missions. That's impossible. Task Force Chimera was a theoretical unit, a designation for missions with a projected casualty rate of over 90%. A young police cadet whispered to his instructor, Sir, Chimera, wasn't that the team sent to extract the biochemist from that corporate fortress in a failed state? The mission where they lost all contact. Vance's fingers flew across his screen. I'm in, he grunted. He pulled up the file for Operation Nightfall, the task force's final, legendary mission. Most of it was still a wall of black, redacted text, but he managed to isolate the objective summary. My God, Vance breathed, his one human eye wide with disbelief. It wasn't just an extraction. It was a trap. Intel was compromised. The entire enemy battalion was waiting for them. He looked up from his tablet, his gaze finally settling on Marin. The logs are corrupted, but the last entry from the other team members is the same. Widow ordered us to fall back. She's creating a diversion. Alone. The weight of those words pressed down on the room. Leo, the young private who had mocked her mercilessly, looked as if he was going to be sick. He had joked about her not being able to handle recoil, while this woman had, by all accounts, faced down an entire battalion by herself to save her team. Hayes read from Vance's screen, his voice filled with reverence. The mission was classified as a total loss. The team was declared Kia. But the objective, the biochemist, was successfully extracted by a separate unit 3 days later. They found him at a secondary rally point, safe and sound. He looked at Marin. He told them a ghost had led him there and vanished into the night. Marin finally turned away from the glowing screen, her expression unreadable. She walked over to the rifle rack, her movements fluid and deliberate. She ignored the pristine, perfectly calibrated competition rifles and instead picked up a weapon that sat neglected in the corner, a Scar-H heavy battle rifle. Its .308 caliber was notorious for its punishing recoil, a beast that most shooters on the range avoided. She didn't check the scope, didn't adjust the stock, didn't even inspect the chamber. She simply held it, and in her hands, the formidable weapon looked less like a tool and more like a natural extension of her body. "I just want to see if I've lost my touch," she said quietly, her voice carrying over the now silent room. "Set a target." 800 meters. A collective gasp went through the crowd. "Ma'am," Gunnery Sergeant Vance interjected, his voice tight with professional concern. "With a 20-knot crosswind and a cold-bore shot on an unfamiliar rifle? Hitting a man-sized target at 800 meters isn't just expert. It's a theoretical improbability." Marin just nodded toward the lane. Carson, his face a mask of awe, scrambled to the controls and designated the target. Far down the range, a steel silhouette shimmered in the distance. Marin raised the rifle to her shoulder in one smooth motion. Her breathing changed, falling into the steady, four-part rhythm of a practiced combatant. She took a breath, released half, and the world seemed to slow down. There was no hesitation, no last-second adjustment. Boom! The Scar-H roared, bucking violently. But in Marin's stance, the recoil was absorbed, tamed, her body moving with the force, not against it. A second later, a sharp ping echoed back from the distance. On the monitor beside the lane, a green light flashed. Center mass. Without lowering the rifle, she cycled the action. Her movements were metronomic, a perfect, deadly rhythm. Boom. Ping. Boom. Ping. Boom. Ping. 4 shots, 4 perfect hits in the space of 10 seconds. Each one landed within a fist-sized grouping in the center of the target. It wasn't just shooting, it was artistry. Vance stared, his cybernetic eye zooming in on the distant target, then back at Marin. He frantically typed into his console. A moment later, a long-buried file appeared on his screen. It was a legendary shooting doctrine, one that military analysts had studied for years but had dismissed as a purely theoretical model, too difficult for any human to master in real-world conditions. He looked up, his voice barely a whisper. "The ghost dance," he said, to no one and everyone. "That shooting pattern, it's the ghost dance." He bowed his head slightly. "I never thought I'd see it in my lifetime." Marin lowered the rifle, placing it gently back on the rack as if it were a sleeping child. The thunderous display of skill was over, and the quiet woman had returned. "What happened to them?" Leo asked, his voice cracking. He took a half-step forward, his face pale with shame and a dawning, terrible respect. "Task Force Chimera. What happened to your team?" Marin's calm eyes grew distant, seeing ghosts that only she could. "I ordered them to the extraction point," she said, her voice low and even. "I told them I would draw the enemy away and meet them in 6 hours. But you never made it to the rendezvous," Hayes finished, the pieces clicking into place. A shadow of pain crossed Marin's face. "I made it," she corrected softly. "But they were hunting me. If I had gone to the extraction point, I would have led the enemy right to my team. So I kept running, deeper into hostile territory, pulling them after me. I made them think the entire team was with me. She paused. By the time I fought my way back to friendly lines 3 days later, my team had been airlifted out. The mission was classified, the record sealed. I was officially listed as killed in action. The silence in the room was a heavy shroud, thick with the weight of her sacrifice. For 12 years, she had been a ghost, giving up her name, her life, her very existence, to ensure her team's survival. She declined Hayes's offer to begin the process of reinstating her identity. She didn't want a medal or a commendation. She only asked for one thing. From the base's long-term evidence storage, she retrieved a single, hollowed-out .308 sniper casing. Inside, on a tiny, rolled-up piece of parchment, were the faded names of the soldiers from a different team, from a mission long before Chimera, the one that had taught her the cost of failure. It was her penance and her purpose. As she prepared to leave, Leo approached her, standing stiffly at attention. "Ma'am," he choked out. "I'm sorry. For what we said." Marin looked at him, and for the first time, a genuine, gentle smile reached her eyes. "You weren't supposed to know," she said. "That's the whole point." She walked past Carson's desk and left a small, handwritten note. It read, "The heaviest weapons are the ones we carry in our silence. Judge with your ears, not your eyes." Marin Weiss vanished as quietly as she had arrived, another ghost slipping back into the shadows of the world. But she left behind an echo that would never fade. A week later, a small, discreet brass plaque appeared on the wall of Firing Lane 9. It didn't bear her name. It simply said, "For the Shepherdess. May we always recognize the flock's true guardian." Private Leo, his bravado stripped away and replaced by a quiet solemnity, put in for a transfer. He was accepted into the grueling training pipeline for the Air Force Pararescue, driven by a newfound purpose, to be one of the people who runs toward disaster, not away from it. Carson placed Marin's note in his top desk drawer. He would read it every morning, a daily reminder that the measure of a person is not found in their appearance, but in the weight of their choices. Gunnery Sergeant Vance, before his retirement 6 months later, added a new, mandatory section to the training manual for all incoming recruits. It began with the words, "Remember that the most dangerous person in the room is often the quietest one. Not because they are hiding their strength, but because they have already used it, in moments you will never know and for people you will never meet." Deep within the Pentagon servers, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes filed his report. He recommended the creation of a new protocol, codenamed the Shepherd Protocol, designed to identify and offer quiet support to former deep cover assets who, like ghosts, might one day reappear. The one-line reply he received through the classified channel was cryptic and, to him, profoundly hopeful. "The flock is larger than you know. She is not alone." The legend of Widow Mark lived on, not in official histories, but in the quiet understanding of those who were there. They learned that day that true heroes don't wear capes or seek applause. They wear worn-out jackets and carry the weight of the world in their silence. They are the shepherds, the guardians, the ghosts who stand watch so that the rest of us can sleep safely, never even knowing their names. We pass people like her on the street every day. The quiet stranger, the unassuming colleague, the person you might dismiss at a glance. Remember her story. Remember that strength isn't always loud, and courage doesn't need an audience. Live with kindness, and never judge a book by its cover. Have you ever misjudged someone based on their appearance? Share your story in the comments below, and please, always comment with respect. Subscribe for more stories that remind us of the heroes hidden all around us.